Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Uncensored Critic podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. It means a lot to me. Thank you very, very much. And today we welcome along someone slightly different today, but someone who has had a big impact in some of the biggest plays over the last couple of years, and that is the lawyer Danielle Manson. And let's take a moment to introduce Danielle and her work. So Danielle is a barrister at Matrix Chambers and has been involved in cases involving serious crime, protest law, inquests and inquiries, bringing empathy and sensitivity to the table, especially during cases regarding children and young people. She thrives in bringing cases like these to justice. She holds an LLB, which is a Bachelor of Law degree from Sheffield, and completed her BPTC, that's Bar Professional Training course, at the University of Law and at Bloomsbury. And prior to her training, she worked at the law reform charity called Justice as a criminal justice policy intern whose research helped to get compensation for a case of miscarriage of justice at the Supreme Court. While studying, she also managed the Innocence Project, which worked on a range of criminal appeals and applications to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, that's the CCRC. In recognition of her services, she was nominated for a Chancellor's Medal and was furtherly invited to sit on the CCRC Stakeholder Forum. In 2023, she spent some time working as a sexual violence lawyer for the Centre of Women's Justice, advising survivors accessing the Women and Girls Network Survivors Gateway about their legal rights when the police asked them for digital data as part of an Operation Soteria pilot scheme. And her work has been used for Netflix, including a documentary, When Missing Turns to Murder, and as a legal consultant on Susie Miller's brilliant productions of Prima, Facie and Alia, providing Susie with the current state of the law when it deals with sexual assault cases against women, both from the side of the victim and the perpetrator. All this and so much more. Check out our website for a much more extended bio on the Matrix website. Link is down below. But in the meantime, Danielle, welcome.
Hello.
How are
Nice
you?
to see you. I'm good. I'm good. I'm surviving this heat, only just,
I
but
know, it's crazy, isn't it?
can't complain really. We'd be moaning if it was raining. So
Yeah, well, we're British. We always
yeah.
moan, so don't we? It's always moaning at the weather. So, yeah, so, God, that's an impressive CV you have there. So, the starter question for you today would be something slightly different. So, in your case, where did the need to practice the law and help people, where did that come from?
So my mum raised me as a single parent, when we were growing up, and for a significant proportion of my childhood, my dad was in prison,
Hmm.
living a lengthy custodial sentence. And then when I was 10, my mum was also arrested, and she was charged with quite a serious criminal offence involving drugs.
Hmm.
She was a qualified English teacher, a woman of good character, never been in trouble before, and she maintained her innocence when questioned by the police and then subsequently at trial. Um, Obviously, that was quite a significant event in my life because she was remanded into custody for a period of time. So I always say this, there was a period in my life when both my parents were in prison. So that was my introduction, I suppose, to the law and what it does and what it stands for. And I'm very pleased to report that after she had a lengthy trial at Nottingham Crown Court, she was acquitted.
Hmm.
So she walked free, and we sort of tried to put that period of our life behind us. But obviously, the impact of her arrest, her remand, her charge, and then her having to go through the criminal justice system, I think probably at that young age of 10, planted a seed maybe in my mind that this was a system that has the potential to be unfair, has the potential to result in wrongful convictions. Obviously, you've just read out my CV, and I've done a lot of work in relation to miscarriages of justice and working on the Innocence Project and stuff because I've always fundamentally believed, in innocent until proven guilty and rights of the individual defendant at the centre of each case. So I think if I had to psychoanalyze myself, I'd say that's where it came from.
Hmm.
But obviously, I was very young, but that was probably the starting point. And then I grew up on a council estate. We were quite poor growing up. I went to ordinary state school, and did my A levels, and I studied law at A level. And I just really enjoyed it, and I had a really good tutor who said to me, and actually said to my mum on a parents' evening, has Danielle thought about being a lawyer? And up until that point, I hadn't really crystallized that as an intention. But yeah, I mean, here we are.
Here
I
you
did.
are now.
Yeah, guess the rest is history. But I think that's probably where it started.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, man. So, how was your time? You just mentioned you did your A levels, then you went to Sheffield to do your LLB. How was your time in Sheffield?
What happens in Sheffield stays in Sheffield. I mean, it was
Explain.
first time away from home.
Yeah, yeah.
Met just some of the best people in the world that I'm still really good friends with now. Living in university halls of residence with, your best friends. Like it was a lot of fun. Did I enjoy the academic study of law? I mean, look, it was all right. I'm not going to sit here and say that I was, thrilled by the prospect of reading jurisprudence about, contract law or property. There were certain parts of the course that I found very boring that didn't spark my interest, but the modules that I always enjoyed studying were the ones that centered on people. So criminal law, family law. There was a module about law and medicine, which looked at, how we should treat embryos, for example, what their status is in the law, and the law around euthanasia, things like that. So there were parts of my time at university that I really enjoyed. Obviously, the social scene in Sheffield's pretty good.
Of
So
course, yeah.
yeah, I had a great time at university. It seems like a very long time ago now.
Yeah, that's good, man. So, and then of course you did your bar professional training. So, and people, so would I be correct in saying that's when you got into the bar? Would that be right in saying?
Yeah, so my journey to becoming a barrister was slightly unconventional. I did my law degree for 3 years, and then after I graduated, I thought I want to go traveling. Loads of people in my year at university had gone traveling before they came to university, and I didn't do that. So I went off to South America, and was backpacking and had an amazing time. And when I came back, my mum was sort of like, you need to use your degree. You've graduated now. You've got your 2-1. What are you going to do? And I hadn't really decided at that point that I wanted to be a barrister, because obviously if you get a law degree, you can either be a barrister or you can be a solicitor, or you can do a graduate training scheme. You can go into business. You can go into politics. There are loads of things that you can do with an LLB, and I hadn't really decided what I wanted to do. And I hadn't really done much legal work experience anyway. So I was looking around on the internet for either, part-time jobs or work experience opportunities. And I came across a barristers' chambers called Doughty Street Chambers. And this wasn't the reason I came across it, but just as an interesting tidbit, that is the chambers that Amal Clooney practices out of. But she wasn't Clooney then. But I was looking on their website, and they had a job vacancy for a junior clerk, which barristers clerks are. They work a bit like agents for actors, so they're basically responsible for getting work in for the barrister, filling their diary, and keeping them sort of happy. And I saw that they were recruiting at Doughty Street for a junior clerk. It was an entry level position. You didn't need any qualifications. You didn't need a law degree. And I just applied. I mean, I don't know what possessed me. I was in Nottingham at the time. That's where I'm from. The job was down in London. And I just put in an application, and I told them all about my mum and the court case, and how, I had an interest in law, and Doughty Street is really at the forefront of human rights work, and that sort of resonated with me as well. And then I got the bloody job, didn't I, as a junior
Yeah.
clerk? So at age 22, after coming back from Brazil and Peru, I moved myself down to London and I started working in the clerk's room and
Mm,
I was photocopying, carrying boxes, sorting out the post. If there were little jobs that the barristers needed, I would be the one to go off and do that. So it was an entry level position. There was nothing legal about it. There was nothing glamorous about it. But what it did was it exposed me to the world of the bar,
mm,
because I think being a barrister, it's kind of sort of shrouded in mystique a little bit, unless you know someone who is a barrister or a barrister's clerk. I think it's a world that not many people know or understand. So I worked for a year as a junior clerk at a very good set of chambers. They were very supportive of my ambition to qualify as a lawyer, and they gave me lots of work experience opportunities while I was working there. I was able to go to court with lots of barristers. And that really, I think, gave me the confidence to then go on and do the next step, which was going to bar school, because bar school is very expensive. When I did the BPTC, it was £18,000 for a 1 year course.
geez.
There's no student loan available, so
Yeah.
you have to
Pay it
fund
out of your
that
pocket.
yourself.
Yeah.
It's mental, and that's one of the reasons that the profession is still dominated by white middle class men,
Mm,
because at the point of entry it's really expensive. And there's lots of amazing organizations out there that are giving scholarships and that are supporting people from non-traditional backgrounds, but it's a huge undertaking. It's a huge risk to do something like that at the very start of your career, and you've got no idea if you're going to be successful or not. But yeah, I after being at Downshire Street for the year, I felt confident and comfortable enough that I thought, yeah, I can give this a go.
mm.
So I did. Um,
And here you are now. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, you built your way up to where you are now. And just we'll get on to Prima Facie and Inter Alia in just a second. But, just reading through your credits on your on the website, on Matrix's website, it's very casual and casually just listed there all these cases, murder, all these things, theft, arrested at a protest, just casually listed like an actor's credit list. I'm thinking, oh my God, they just there. But of course, like it's a different world, different profession, and all that. But the amount of stuff that you've done and actually having this court experience, I mean, do you become numb to it in some ways, or is there still a part of you which has to look after yourself when you're in these intense cases?
yeah, I think I've developed a fairly high threshold for human suffering,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
There's not a lot that you can show me or tell me that shocks me or
mm,
sort of upsets me. And that's quite sad in a way, because I used to be very in touch with my emotions. I was very, very empathetic, and I'd watch a bloody advert for the RSPCA and I'd be in tears. And I think over the course of the last 10 years, because I've been practicing 10 years now,
mm,
uh, yeah, you develop a very, very thick skin, because you are at the forefront of some of the worst things that people in society do to each other.
mm,
And you have to read the evidence, look at the pictures, watch the videos, read the witness statements, and you have to detach from it because you wouldn't survive otherwise. So I think it's just a consequence of doing the job. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm numb to it, which in a way has given me a really good armor for going through life, because I think some of the things that other people would ordinarily get upset about, they don't really upset me.
mm.
Sort of like, yeah, all right, that's okay.
You can see what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because in the scheme of things, the things that upset lots of people, when I compare them to what some of my clients are going through, it's just small stuff, isn't it? So I try not to sweat the small stuff, and I just try and have a bit of perspective. But yeah, I think it's. I joke and I say, "Oh, I'm dead inside." But I'm just not really that emotional or I don't get upset that much anymore. And but I don't think that's a good thing. I think that sometimes you need to take a step back and have a bit of a breather and just get back in touch with your emotions, because we all need to feel things.
Yeah.
Can't just go through life like a robot.
No, no, we don't want that. We don't want that at all. But I would imagine when a case comes up with lawyers like yourself, when even you take a step back and you go, "Holy shit, this must be big. This must be serious." But hopefully that won't come about. But anyway, so I want to talk to you about because I met you actually on for James Beeman's podcast with Susie Miller back in oh, what's it called? It's in Soho. Yeah, just go inside. Is it inside Soho? One of the two. Anyway, and I met you there that night with a few other people there, and met Susie and everything, and it was fantastic. And I'm just sort of preparing for today. I rewatched Inter Alia and stuff, which of course is now on National Theatre at Home. And but there's a moment in Prima Facie which I've always been intrigued by, and I actually want to ask you this, because there's a line where Tessa says, "There is no legal truth. No, there is no real truth. Only legal truth." And so what does that mean exactly?
Well, I think what Susie is, the genius of Susie Miller, I think my interpretation of what she's tapping into is
Hmm.
basically, just because someone is acquitted or found not guilty, it doesn't mean that they're innocent. And and that is because in order for someone to be convicted, the jury have to be sure.
Mm.
Now, sure is a standard that the law has set in criminal cases,
Yeah.
and that is the standard that the evidence has to meet effectively. But it's only it's just a method of us testing evidence, that we have to be sure. Sure's a really, really, really high standard. I think it's the right standard in criminal law. I think if you're going to put someone in prison, then everyone should be sure, especially the jury. But I think we've all been in situations where intuitively we just know something. But if we were to swear an oath and say, "Are we sure about something?" we probably wouldn't be able to say that we are. Now, it doesn't mean that our assessment isn't true. It just means that it doesn't meet the threshold that the criminal law requires. So when Susie talks about legal truth, for me, that's how we measure, how we assess what people say and whether we believe them or not.
Hmm.
And so what I find really interesting is in Scotland, they have guilty, not guilty, and not proven. So it's a slightly different approach to juries returning their verdict. And so obviously, not guilty, the jury couldn't be sure. Guilty, the jury could be sure. And not proven it sits somewhere in between, and it's almost like the jury would be saying, we do accept what the victim said, we do accept Tessa's account, but we just can't be sure of it. Like, we can't quite reach that threshold.
Yeah.
So Susie's use of the concept of legal truth, I think it's just a very clever way, a very poetic way of explaining the fact that we have these very blunt tools in the criminal justice system, where we try and expose the truth of something having happened or not happened.
Hmm.
But they are just tools. It is just a system. It's not real. And the thresholds that we have to meet, being sure beyond reasonable doubt is what it used to say.
Yeah.
It's slightly artificial, because you can still believe someone, but maybe just not to the criminal standard.
Mm. No, it's always fascinating. And of course, I'll come back to that in just a second. I also want to ask you about, the recurring thing, particularly of prima facie, is the 1 in 3, and it's 1 in 3 women, look to your left, look to your right, etc. But also that concept is there right from the beginning. When she says, look to your left, look to your right, that one in three of you will not make it. You're all in competition with each other. And then it's the journey of it. And again, this is a line from the Prima Facie where it says, one in 10 of you will get pupillage, one in five will get silk, and one has a chance of being a judge each decade. So what's pupillage and what's silk exactly?
The pupillage is the training process that you have to undertake in order to become a barrister. So you do your LLB, law degree, or if you don't do an LLB, if you do English or maths, you can then do a 1 year conversion course, which sort of converts that to a qualifying law degree. You get your qualifying law degree and you go to bar school and you do the bar course, the very expensive course that I told you about.
18,000 a year.
Well, when I did it, I think it's probably gone up a few
Probably
bobs.
25, 26 now or something, isn't it?
But after you've done your bar course, you then need to get what's called pupillage, which is it's effectively an apprenticeship where you spend the first 6 months shadowing a very experienced barrister. You will work on their cases with them. You will do research for them. You will draft documents. You'll sit with them in court. You don't speak, but you sit and observe them.
Right.
And in the second 6 months of that apprenticeship, you yourself start doing cases, very low level cases to begin with. So I'm a criminal barrister. I only do crime. So my pupillage was doing, shoplifting in the magistrates court, or like someone pushing someone outside a pub where no injury is caused.
Yeah.
So you start off very low, but you're on a provisional practicing certificate and you're being supervised all the time by your pupil supervisor. So yeah, that's the pupillage process, and that's a year long. You do that at a chambers. I'm at Matrix Chambers now, but I didn't do my pupillage here. I did my pupillage elsewhere. But it's only after that 12-month period are you fully qualified.
Yeah. And then one in 10 of you has is it 1 in 10? No. And then one has a chance of being a judge each decade.
Well, I don't know if those statistics are the same now. Back then, I mean, obviously, Susie wrote Prima Facie in Australia, so originally. So I don't know whether those statistics translate, but obviously, it is only a very small proportion of people who qualify as barristers that then go on to become judges. And she's right about the sort of King's Council. I think it's probably Queen's Council back then when we had the Queen, but they've now all become King's Council. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line is it's a very, very competitive profession from the minute you apply for pupillage until you get appointed to sit on the bench. So I think at my chambers, Matrix, we offer 2 traineeships every year. And we usually get, I mean, it's in excess of 300 written applications. I think probably closer to 400 or 500 for 2 places. So each of those written applications has to be reviewed, and then we will have a first round of interviews and then a second round of interviews. So, the chances of getting pupillage are statistically probably the same as being cast in a West End play. It's a really small proportion of people that actually make it.
Yeah, it's hugely competitive, I would imagine as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hugely competitive, but I think that fortunately for me and people like me, it is a profession that's moving more towards being diverse. And what I mean by that is there used to be a time where, it was just posh white men who were barristers or who were representing people in court. But now I think because of the jury system, because juries are very diverse, because, the client base, the defendants, the people you're representing are equally very diverse. There's a recognition across the profession that we need a diverse bar, and, the barristers representing the clients should have shared at least a little bit of what it's like to walk in their shoes, because, there's a huge difference between the life experience of, an old Etonian who went on to Cambridge, who then became a barrister, to, a young black kid who grew up on a housing estate in Brixton and who finds himself, at the centre of a murder trial.
Mm.
And I think it's really important that clients and that defendants have a choice of representation, and that they're not just given, this one size fits all barrister, because there's not, there's lots of different types of barristers, and we do lots of different things for different
Yeah,
people.
definitely. Yeah. And of course, one thing that's really highlighted in both of these plays and is the fact that there is clearly some things which are not quite right with the law when it comes to representing people, particularly women, in sexual assault cases, etc. And in the case of, sorry guys, we're going to touch on some spoilers today, just to let you know about both plays, so you have been warned. So with Prima Facie, it's the scene in particular where after the event as such, when she's back at her house with Julian, and she runs through legal truth in her brain, where she said, had you slept with a defendant before? Had you invited him to your home? And she runs through Uber driver, waiter at the restaurant, gelato server, and so all these people who saw them laughing and giggling and having a fantastic time. And then suddenly she brings him to court for rape. And of course, in the play, tragically, the case gets thrown out, and they basically said, no, there's not enough evidence to prosecute Julian, so therefore he's not guilty. And in the case of Inter Alia as well, and this is one area I wanted to look at as well, was that a lot of the people I've spoken to involved in Inter Alia, the actresses involved and people involved in that, shout out to the guys, you know who you are, is that there's a line in Inter Alia in particular where Jessica, who's played by Rosamund Pike, says, "You're morally not legally guilty." After Harry's confession that what he did at the party was inappropriate with another girl when she was asleep. So, and I remember one of them saying, just the gasps from the audience to say that you're morally not legally guilty, and yet you can still plead not guilty, even though you've told your mother, who is a judge, I did do it, I am guilty. So, and both of these things, like there's flaws in the legal system and everything. So how did you work with Susie to really highlight that and consult her and bring these holes to light? Indeed.
Well, Susie is a qualified lawyer in Australia and had practiced for years and years before she even met me. So she was already fully aware, and I think wanting to bring to light some of the issues that she had encountered during her practice in Australia.
Yeah.
So I absolutely cannot take credit for any of the brilliant ideas that she had or that she has shared and articulated in the play. And obviously, Prima Facie had already had a very successful run in Sydney before it came over to London, and before I ever met her, actually. But I think really my role with Susie began by helping translate the Australian Prima Facie to sort of make the legal language that was being used appropriate for UK audiences. And what I mean by that is, as lawyers, we've all watched TV shows, films, plays where there's a gavel on the judge's bench, or they've got a lawyer standing up and saying objection.
Yeah.
We don't do any of that in this country. So it was more initially, it was more helping with the etiquette of the courtroom, costume set, just little things, and I suppose working with the actresses, so working with Jodie and working with Rosamund, and just giving them as much exposure to the real criminal courts as they wanted or needed, because obviously both of them are building a world in their own head. They have to have a real world for them to be able to give those performances, and I think it's really difficult to do that unless you've actually been physically in court. So that was really how it started with the actresses. And then obviously Prima Facie was more more, my role was more technical, and it was more like we wouldn't use this word, we'd use this word instead. So sort of translation. With Inter Alia, that was slightly different because obviously Susie wrote Inter Alia after Prima Facie, and wrote it as not as a result of, but I know sort of inspired by some of the female judges that I'd introduced her to whilst we were doing Prima Facie. And some of the ideas and some of the themes, that there are some lines in the play that when I read it, I was like, oh, I've said that, of Inter Alia. And so I think it was probably, and I mean, you'll have to ask Susie, but I think it was probably that she was over doing work on Prima Facie in the run up to it opening at Harold Pinter, and she was sort of immersed in legal London, and there were some themes or issues that were coming up in Prima Facie that she felt like she wanted to explore a little bit more in Inter Alia. And Prima Facie is obviously an incredible, it's a masterpiece, but generally speaking, everyone walks out of Prima Facie and feels the same way. Everyone feels like Tessa has been completely betrayed by the system, and we are absolutely 100% on her side. Inter Alia is different because people walk out of Inter Alia and some of them don't know how to feel. Some of them, a husband and a wife can feel completely differently. You hear people arguing about what was the right thing for her to do. You've got mothers saying, well, of course she should have done that, and then you've got other people saying absolutely not. She should have turned him into the police. So it was almost like through Susie spending time with lawyers as part of the Prima Facie production and that process, I think she became inspired, and there were a lot of like knots that she sort of wanted to unravel. So I didn't do anything specific for either of those plays, apart from help Susie, Jodie, Rosamond, Justin, Miriam, our wonderful set designer, just help them really immerse themselves in the reality of the criminal bar. And then it was Susie's genius really that sort of plucked out these themes and these ideas and these knots. She always talks about the knot at the center of Prima Facie was always really, really clear to her. And I think that Inter Alia was just another manifestation of her wanting to try and unravel a knot, probably informed by her experience of motherhood as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting the debate. And I think I remember Flo Dawson, who was Rosamond's understudy in London, and of course at the National as well. She heard, and it's in our episode as well, where she heard people walking out past the stage door, and I remember she heard one man say, "Oh, I think I need to go home and have a conversation with my son about this." And that's brilliant. That's exactly what you want from a reaction. It shows that the piece has landed, and it's landed in so many different ways. And I love the contradiction and the paradigm. I don't know what the right word is, but it's the push and pull of Jessica, especially in Inter Alia. Do I do what I know is right, which is turn my son in, or do I do the right thing as a mother, as a human being, and say, we can still get you off. You may have done this, but we can still, there's not enough evidence for them to make you guilty. So therefore, if you still plead not guilty, just tell you what you told me and keep that very, very quiet, we can still get you off.
And the reality is that as a defense barrister, that is literally my job.
Yeah.
If I get a client who comes to me who wants to confess and hold his hands up, but the evidence against him is very weak, and I don't think that the prosecution will be able to prove it, I would be, remiss in my role as a barrister to just say to him, all right, then we'll plead guilty then. I mean, that's not how the system works. The system works because the prosecution bring the case and the prosecution have to prove it. And if they can't prove it, then I'm afraid we can't just put people in prison just because we want to. There has to be, this legal truth, and the evidence has to meet the legal truth where it is. So what Jessica says to Harry at the end, I'll tell you, I've had many conversations with clients like that where I've said, before you say anything to me, I'm gonna tell you where I'm gonna level with you. I'm gonna tell you where I'm at. If this goes to trial, it's very unlikely that you'll be convicted of this because there are holes in the prosecution case. Now, ethically, morally, how do I feel about that? Huge question. But also, it's literally my job.
Yeah.
That's my job. And everyone who watches Prima Facie sort of sits on the side of Tessa and the prosecution and the police, and we're all like willing her to sort of succeed. But the flip side of a case like the one that was at the centre of Prima Facie is that there are sometimes women who make false allegations of rape. It does happen. There was a case in the press, an incredibly high profile case, the trial of Liam Allen. And he was a young guy in his 20s in a relationship with his girlfriend. She went to the police and accused him of rape. It got all the way to trial. I think on day 2 or day 3 of the trial, the complainant's mobile phone download was given to his defense barrister, and his defense barrister was a mum, and she got the download in the middle of the day. It was thousands and thousands of pages of text messages. She sorted her kids out, she put her kids to bed, and she sat down at the dining room table about midnight or something to start work on this download. And she was searching through, and she effectively found messages that completely, it didn't just undermine the complainant's account, it completely demonstrated that she was not telling the truth about this allegation in relation to Liam Allen. And,
Wow.
The defense barrister went back to court the next day and showed the messages to the prosecution, and the case fell apart, and it ended up being on like the front page of the Daily Mail. Now, those sorts of cases, do happen. I've had cases where I've gone through and found, really, really clear evidence that totally undermines the prosecution. And it's really, really terrible, actually, because, that I'm the first person to say, like, #BelieveWomen. I'm feminist through and through. But I do have to say the flip side of Tessa's journey and everything that she went through is that when it's one person's word against another, when it's just two people there, and it's really, really difficult to be sure. It's really, really difficult to know. And that's why that sort of checklist that you were saying Tessa ran through before she was deciding whether to go to the police, that's exactly what a barrister would be doing, because during the incident, because of the nature of rape and sexual assault, they usually happen in private where there's no one else around. There's not going to be, CCTV footage or, a third party independent witness. So it's often just going to boil down to one person's word versus the other. And that's why in those sorts of cases, we always look at like the surrounding circumstances to see if there's any evidence that points towards guilt or innocence, or evidence that can undermine credibility. And obviously Susie's writing is so genius because she talks about the idea that the actual act, the actual incident is always very vivid and very clear in someone's mind when they have been raped. But obviously the detail around the outside, not always so clear. And that is 100% true. But because we're dealing with legal truth, because we're dealing with, a very blunt tool, the only tool at our disposal, i.e. the criminal trial, if you think of the criminal trial as being a tool, the only way we can really interrogate truth and lies when something's happened in private and there's only one person's word against another, is by looking at all of the sort of peripheral bits of evidence where there might be corroboration, there might be text messages, there might be a way for you to undermine a timeline. And if you can undermine a timeline, you can then show that someone's unreliable because you can't get the day right, or you can't get the time right, then you're probably not right about what's happened in that bedroom between you and Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is terrible. I mean, I'd obviously I'd read Prima Facie quite a lot before it went on at the Harold Pinter. I'd worked with, all the team, Jodie, Justin, Susie. I knew that play like back to front and inside out. And I went to the first preview, and I walked out of there like in floods of tears, crying, felt sick, like didn't want to go to work the next day. And I remember I messaged Jodie, and I just said, like, I feel like you are holding a mirror up to my profession, but me personally, and all the things I do to justify the work that I do, the job that I do, the position that I take in relation to cases. And it felt so exposing and confronting, and like, there was a lot of shame. I felt a lot of shame around it because I was being called out effectively for complicity in a system that is stacked against women.
Yeah, I remember.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, it is stacked against women.
Yeah.
But obviously everything that I said before about, burden standard of proof and stuff, it's just, that's as Jessica Park says, that's the system we have.
Yeah. And, the final lines of Prima Facie, I mean, there's so much, I mean, I can't imagine, like, just for people like yourself who are involved in the courts and in the legal system, when she says somehow, somewhere, sometime, something has to change. And, I mean, those words, I mean, you can apply to any kind of scenario, but in that one, it's not just a one little thing. This is livelihoods. This is people's souls. This is people's lives, that some people have put on the line. And, in fact, I was going to ask you actually, has anyone actually stood up in court and lied to your face? And of course, you've answered that already, In some cases, I mean, who would do that? I mean, that's a really special type of person. Jesus Christ. Anyway, but yeah, no. But these plays, they mean so much to so many people, and and I suppose really I want to ask you, like, so if you were in charge of the Prima Facie of Tessa's case, I mean, say you were the jury or the judge, in that courtroom, and you're hearing Tessa's account of everything and everything that she lists. So, sadly, do you think that from a legal truth perspective, that unfortunately that would have been the right decision for the courts to make because they're just doing their job? Or is there anything else that could have been said in that trial which would have got Tessa off, which would have got Julian prosecuted at all?
He was prosecuted, and it was the jury that returned the not guilty verdict. So the case wasn't thrown out. It got all the way to trial. I mean, there are some cases that the CPS just choose not to prosecute, but they obviously felt that Tessa was a reliable enough witness for it to be, taken to trial and prosecuted.
Right.
Was there anything else that she could do? Well, obviously, so the difficulty is that in Prima Facie, the play, we don't hear the cross-examination questions that are put to her. We only hear her answers. Yeah. Yes, no, maybe. Yes. So it's very difficult for me to assess how badly damaged her credibility was in the play. I have to say, I was Susie's legal consultant for the film, which is obviously in post-production now and is going to the Toronto Film Festival later this year. And in that version, we do hear the questions that are asked of Tessa, and we do see some of the damage that's done to her credibility during cross-examination. Is there anything else? Is there any other bit of evidence that Tessa could have? I mean, I don't think so. I mean, she obviously, her being confused about the hands is a fairly, I don't want to say fatal, but obviously it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake to make if you're saying I'm very clear about what was happening in that moment, to only just remember that your hands were sort of being held above your head by one, and that's why he had his other hand free to cover your mouth. Is something that, as a defense barrister, I would be saying, this was a very significant thing that was happening to her. Surely members of the jury, she would have a clear image in her head, and she would be able to have told you from the very beginning that that's what was happening. But there often isn't, and you don't need corroboration. I want to be very clear to women out there that might be watching this that have had something awful happening to them. You don't need corroboration. You don't need text messages. You don't need, to have been seriously physically injured during the course of sex. We did away with the law on corroboration a long time ago in this country. So it can just be one person's word against another. But going back to the system says that it's not about which version of events you prefer. Do we prefer Tessa's version over Julian's? It's whether you can be sure of Tessa's account. And that's the problem. So when I make closing speeches in trials and I address the jury, I sort of do this with my hands, and I talk to them about the fact that in a criminal trial, you're not putting two people's accounts on a set of scales and saying, oh, which account do I prefer? Because we have the presumption of innocence, and because the prosecution have the burden and standard of proof, in that trial, the scales would have start off tipped in Julian's favour, and he would have been presumed innocent. And it only would have been if the prosecution were able to tip the scales up the other way via Tessa's evidence, would the jury have been entitled to return guilty verdicts. And so it's a problem with the system, because the burden being on the prosecution, and the way, I don't want to give a legal lecture, but obviously in criminal law, there are three things that have to be proven in order for the offence of rape and sexual assault to have been made out. Right. So for rape, there has to have been penetration with a penis. So that's the physical actus reus that has to take place. And then in relation to the mental element, the person, usually a female, but obviously could be a male as well, the victim, A, has to not be consenting, and B, the defendant, the person doing the penetrating, has to not believe that they are not consenting. So it's having to prove a negative. And that's why the system and the legislation really is the problem, because it's so difficult for the prosecution to prove that someone is guilty of rape. They have to prove A, that she, in this case Tessa, didn't consent, and B, that Julian didn't believe that she wasn't consenting. So it's really complicated, because it's the prosecution proving a double negative, and it's also a very high threshold. So the jury have to be sure that he knew that she was not consenting. Now, there are lots of criminal offences in this country where we have what's called a reverse burden. So basically, the prosecution have to prove a certain element, but if as a defendant you want to rely on a particular defence, you as the defendant have to prove. So one example is possession of a bladed article. So if you are arrested by the police and you've got a knife on you, and the prosecution can prove, that you had it at the time, then that's all that they need to get it to trial. And if the defendant wants to say, well, I have a reasonable excuse for having that knife. I was going on a picnic, and so I had the knife because we bought some bread and I wanted to cut the bread. And the burden shifts to the defendant to be able to prove. He doesn't have to make the jury sure, but he has to make the jury believe sort of on the balance of probabilities. So that's 50-50.
Yeah.
I think of sure as being sort of in your 90% if we're going to look at percentages, but balance of probabilities is 50-50. For possession of a bladed article, the burden shifts to the defendant, and the defendant has to be able to say, well, I had the knife because I was going to use it to cut up bread. Now, I've articulated and spoke to people and put arguments forward for potentially a reverse burden in rape cases. Using those three elements that I've just outlined, the prosecution would have to prove A, that there was penetration, B, that the victim did not consent. So the jury would have to be sure of that. But then if a defendant wants to rely on the fact that, he thought that she was consenting, that's his defense, reasonable belief in consent, why couldn't we reverse the burden? Why couldn't we ask men to have to give evidence at trial and for them to articulate, well, why did you think she was consenting? Because at the minute, there's no requirement for them to actually put that into words. They often do, in the course of a trial, they'll often give evidence about why in their head at the time they thought that there was consent. But if you reverse the burden, you would be, and this is again why Susie's writing is just so genius. She talks about the law spinning on the wrong axis. The emphasis is in the wrong place. The emphasis is on the woman to articulate what she did to demonstrate that she was not consenting, so that it would be clear to a man, that there was no consent. But if you flip it, and if we use Susie's words and, we put it on a different axis, the question would then be, well, why did the man believe that? Why did Julian think that Tessa was consenting in circumstances where she may have frozen, where she may not be speaking? We know often sort of lawyers talk about this fight or flight theory, where you're sort of caught in the middle of something and your two instinctive reactions are to fight the person or flight, to try and take off.
Of course, Tessa says no as well. She says, doesn't she? She says, she goes, no, I need to brush my teeth, Julian. I need to do that.
So what I was about to say is that we have fight or flight, but we also now have freeze or friend. And the friend is really interesting because we know that there's a lot of women that when they feel sort of attacked or sort of almost like that gut feeling where oh God, something awful is about to happen, they will try and befriend the person who is doing it to them so that they can sort of de-escalate the situation. So they might say, exactly like Tessa says, oh, I haven't brushed my teeth. Oh, stop being so silly. That is the friend response. And that is,
I see.
Women being very polite. Instead of a woman saying, get your hands off me, what the hell do you think you're doing? We're much more, it's patriarchy, isn't it? We've been conditioned to think that we should just go, oh, don't do that now. Oh, I haven't brushed my teeth. Why did Tessa feel the need to say, I haven't brushed my teeth, as opposed to, I don't want to have sex with you? Because our psyche tells us that if we're more gentle and if we're more polite and if we smile sweetly, that's going to be more effective.
Who snuck that into the mix?
Pardon?
Who snuck that into the mix? I don't know.
Well, who drafted the Sexual Offences Act 2003 when they formulated the offence of rape and they put those three elements that need to be proven?
Wow.
Who would, just in 2003, who would have been, part of that drafting process. Because what's interesting is if you go back through the legislation and you look at the journey that the Sexual Offences Act went on, there were arguments for a reverse burden. And there were also arguments, again, I don't want to be technical because it's kind of boring, but there were arguments that would have meant a defendant would have been required to articulate why he thought that there was consent. And all of those things were put forward, but were ultimately rejected. I'll tell you why they were rejected, because our lawmakers are predominantly men, so they're thinking from their perspective. Whereas if you speak to a room full of women, I think they'd have a very different view on how the law of rape should be constructed on the statute books.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, and like how, we need an updated version, not 2003. It needs to be the 2026 one, and I think you should write it as well.
Well, I did put together there was an organisation that was off the back of Prima Facie that we called TESSA. And it was called, TESSA stood for the Examination of Serious Sexual Assault. And effectively, it's Susie's point that, the law is an organic thing. It grows and it changes, and it should reflect the society we live in. And, the Sexual Offences Act is more than 20 years old now. Look how far society has come in those 20 years. Look at some of the changes that we've had in legislation. Men are now able to be guilty of raping their wives, which was, a relatively recent change. It really does go to show that the law, the way the statute is constructed, the legal truth that needs to be proven, constantly needs reviewing and updating, because I don't think that the law at the minute reflects the way most ordinary people would understand how consent applies, and it's funny, you watch a lot of if you watch a lot of TV shows from the night films or TV shows from the 90s, you see a lot of men pursuing a woman, and the woman will be initially saying no, I don't want to kiss you. And the man sort of pursuing her and trying to I always think there's a scene in The Devil Wears Prada where Anne Hathaway's character, the guy's like kissing her, and she's like, no, stop it, I've got to get up early in the morning, blah blah blah. And he just pursues it, and then eventually she goes, oh, I've run out of excuses. That is how sex used to be portrayed in the media back in the 90s and the noughties. Whereas if you watch I don't know, Heartbreakers on Netflix, that's obviously targeting a much younger demographic, those sort of tweens and teens nowadays. If they ever show a scene where someone's about to kiss someone, they always have them saying, I'd like to kiss you now, or, can I kiss you? And that's why, it was really interesting. Me and Susie used to have loads of conversations about this. And I used to say, asking someone, is it okay? Is this okay? It's sort of the easiest thing in the world to do when you're in the middle of kissing someone, or, checking in that they're understanding or that they're enjoying it in the same way you are. What was brilliant about Inter Alia was that Susie captured that as well. She's got Michael, Jessica's husband, talking about how the game was very different for him back then. He used to chase women. You've got Jessica making sure that Harry, she says to Harry, did you ask the three little words? Did you say, is this okay? Is this okay? And I think those are all valid reflections of how people nowadays think that consent should be secured. It should be it's a two-way conversation. It's not for a woman to articulate that she's not consenting. It's really for both parties to have a meeting of the minds and to be able to say, yeah, we're happy to go forward. We're happy to go forward with this act.
But we need, and again, I've said it on here, I'll say it again. Art, we change the fucking world. We need more plays like this to really show that there is a problem and there
Well,
are bad things.
I saw someone say that art doesn't change the world, but art changes people, and
Mm,
people change the world. So I, being meeting Susie, having the absolute privilege of being able to read her work, see early drafts,
mm,
feed it, share my thoughts with her, has like changed me at my very core.
yeah,
Um, it's changed the sort of lawyer I am. It's changed the conversations I have when I'm in rooms with people of influence. It's Susie's work has changed the criminal bar. It's changed the profession. I mean, the most hilarious thing has happened.
mm,
I was on the phone to Susie yesterday because obviously she's Australian, and the play Prima Facie was on in Australia
yeah,
before it came over here. But in Australia, there was a criminal trial last year, I think, where a defendant was on trial for rape.
mm,
And during the course of the trial, a juror came in. I can't remember what stage the trial was at, but came in and had Prima Facie, the novel,
mm,
in their bag, and had it in the juror room. And I don't know if there was any sort of conversation, because obviously what the jurors speak about is completely private. The lawyers in the case don't know, the judge doesn't know. But it was reported back to the defense barrister and the prosecution barrister, I think by the court clerk, that they'd seen this book Prima Facie.
mm,
And obviously the court clerk must have been aware of the subject matter of the book. Well, anyway, the defendant in that case, charged with rape, gets convicted of rape. And he then appeals that to the Court of Appeal. And one of the grounds of his appeal was that the fact that Prima Facie, the book, that one of the jurors was reading it, meant that that juror was prejudiced, and that the juror shouldn't have been allowed to stay on the jury. And what is actually hilarious is that in the Court of Appeal, which is obviously a senior court, it's where law is, where precedent is made, and rulings in the Court of Appeal apply to all the courts of first instance. In the Court of Appeal, they have gone through and cited Prima Facie, the novel, extensively. There are, in this judgment from the Court of Appeal, there are pages and pages and pages of Susie's words,
mm.
where where the court's sort of undertaking an analysis of what Susie had said in the book, and whether or not that would mean that a juror had been unduly influenced, and so the jury should have been discharged. I mean, it's absolutely like art imitating life, imitating life, imitating life. Like it's just it's insane. But that is the extent and the power of of Susie's work, that
Yeah,
it's changed the world, but it's now
yeah,
bloody changing it's now changing the legal system and the case precedent, because there's now been a Court of Appeal ruling where her book is at the center of it. It's so funny.
no, no. Again, we changed the fucking world. We changed the fucking world, and these two plays especially, and with your help, is really being real. You're being real trailblazers in creating a better world, and we'll get there piece by piece, and that's exactly what we want. We want justice for all. I mean, we want the system to serve everybody as well. We'll prosecute the people who have done the crime, and make those who have had bad things happen to them get justice for what's happened. And we need more things like this to keep us awake and aware of what more we can do. And I'm sure everyone owes the whole company and yourself just a lot of thanks for the work that you're doing. And yeah, Danielle, I know we're very pushed for time. I know you've got to shoot off to other things now. I've just got two. I mean, I could have you here for another 2 hours talking about it. I've got so many more things I want to ask you. We could save them for another time. But I've got two very quick fire questions for you left. The closing questions for every guest. So, first of all, what would you say was a bit of advice you wish you heard when you were starting out?
Starting out in the law,
Mm,
retain perspective. So I think it's so easy, and and this applies whether you're working in theatre, whether you're working, in a bank, whether you're a teacher, I think things that happen to you in the moment can feel completely overwhelming. But actually, if you take a step back and retain a bit of perspective and remember that life is like this, it's not like this, eventually, it will pass. Whatever you are experiencing, it will pass. So yeah, just keep a bit of perspective at all times.
Yeah. This too shall pass. Whatever it is, it doesn't last forever. So that's the good thing. That's nice. And finally today, what would you say has been an experience or experiences you've had in your legal career, or in this case, your arts career as well, helping with Netflix and the theatre as well. But so yeah, what's been an experience or experiences you've had in your life that you'll never forget?
Oh, well, I mean, working on both of these plays, like I I mean, you didn't ask me how I ended up getting involved
Mm.
in these plays in the first place, and the
Yeah.
story is kind of unbelievable. But effectively, I slid into the DMs of James Bierman on Twitter one day after they announced Prima Facie and said, "I see you're doing a play about being a criminal barrister. I'm a criminal barrister. I'd love to help in whatever way I can." And fortunately, James saw the message and got in contact, and we set up an initial meeting, and it just sort of snowballed from there. But I mean, being being involved in these plays has, I mean, it's changed on a personal level. It's changed me to my very core. On a professional level, it's completely altered the way I approach cases, especially rape cases. I know, I know it's impacted on judges that I'm friends with, and the way legal directions are given to the jury, etc. So, um, I see all of that on a sort of daily basis. Being being involved in both plays has had a massive knock-on effect in my sort of professional life as well, because I've off the back of working on both of these projects, I've started producing theatre as well now, because it was it's such an amazing thing to see a play go from first draft
Mm.
right through to first preview or whatever. I mean, and obviously my involvement in Inter Alia was a little bit more. I was involved a little bit more because I did see the first draft that Susie wrote, and then I saw various versions, and then sort of stayed on it until it was on its feet.
Mm.
But because of that process, because I enjoyed it so much and I loved making theatre, and I loved being in the room and the process of telling these amazing stories. Jane Moriarty, who is the
Yeah.
associate director, who was the associate director on Prima Facie, she and I are actually producing a musical together that's based
Mm.
on another criminal case.
Amazing.
So I mean, just like knowing, just knowing Susie Miller, and being involved in projects that she's worked on, has just opened up a whole new world for me. And I'll be forever grateful to her. I should say as well, like both Jodie and Rosamond,
Mm.
like, were an absolute joy to work with. Like
Yeah.
they both just absolutely fell in love with being in court, and seeing the real thing. They were both fascinated by it. They both wanted more, than just the initial preliminary first visit. And I've I've got to thank them, and I've got to thank Susie as well, actually, for representing the profession that I love
Mm.
so well. Because I tell you, there is a reason that barristers and judges flock to see Susie's work.
Mm. Mm.
And that's because she's so accurate in how she depicts our everyday life. We're so lucky. We're so lucky that she knows what she's talking about, and that she you know, that she does it well, because, like, as I say, there are lots of things that are put on the stage and screen that are just a load of crap, but
Yeah,
neither
very true.
of
Very true.
have been that. So yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything. Seeing as we've been talking about it, I can't think of anything else that's sort of
No,
had
that's great.
had such a huge snowball effect. So, you know, don't be afraid to slide into someone's DMs, because
Definitely not.
you just don't know where it's going to end up. So
Indeed. Indeed.
yeah.
Slide into those DMs, guys. You just never know. Yeah. And of course, just before we finish, I want to do a big shout out not only to Susie Miller and Justin and everyone involved in the company, but also to Trish Wadley as well, who introduced us as well. You know, Trish is the indomitable, brilliant producer that she is, and I love the fact she's just like a social animal. She just knows so many incredible people like yourself, and I've been very lucky to cross paths with her and of course with yourself today. And yeah, unfortunately we'll have to finish there because I know you've got other things to get on to, Danielle, but thank you so much for your time today. I've really, really, really enjoyed this. And yeah, I'd love to do another one with you as well. I've still got so many more questions for you involving the plays and everything. So we'll get on to that at some point in the future. But yeah, you're definitely going to come back. I've still got so many more things to pick your brain about. But yeah, wow, that was fantastic. We'll have to finish there. So if you just hang on, I'll finish the recording. We'll have a tiny debrief and you can shoot off. So yeah, brilliant. Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This has been the Uncensored Critic podcast. I'll be back very, very soon. And always remember, art, we change the fucking world. Thank you, Danielle.